They're here to take your calls, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, say Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and you can WhatsApp us as well if you want to on 0345 6060 973. And you can even watch us on Global Player, all these goodies that we offer you.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Shadow Health Secretary has told LBC police must reinvestigate after an NHS worker secretly recorded a patient naked. Lancashire Constabulary decided no crime was committed at the Harbour, a psychiatric facility in Blackpool, where Streeting says the force needs to rethink.
The idea that a crime wouldn't have been committed is shocking. And then there can only be two outcomes. Either a crime has been committed, in which case this person needs to face the full force of the law, or we have it confirmed that actually there's a gap in the law, in which case I think it would need to be filled.
A 39-year-old man's become the first person in England and Wales to be jailed for cyber flashing. Nicholas Hawkes sent unsolicited images to a 15-year-old girl and a woman. HM Revenue and Customs is being criticised after announcing changes which include closing the self-assessment helpline for some of the year. They say it'll encourage people to go online instead. And Tesco's lost an appeal in a dispute with Lidl over the use of a yellow circle against a blue background. The High Court ruled Tesco took unfair advantage of Lidl's reputation for low prices, but said it didn't infringe copyright. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 15 points at 77.38. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.17.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Rain overnight, but staying dry in Scotland, a low of 3. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Serena Farrow.
This is LBC. From Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question. With Iain Dale.
And welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. It's 1 minute past 8. On the panel with me tonight, to my left, Alison Thewliss, who's SNP MP for Glasgow Central. She is the party's Home Affairs spokesperson. Next to her, Esther McVey, Conservative Minister without portfolio in the Cabinet Office. She's been dubbed the Minister for Common Sense. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that during the course of the programme. And she's also MP for Tatton. To my right, Baroness Kate Hoey, non-affiliated peer, who's former Labour MP and Minister. And next to her, Mathew Hulbert, political commentator and Liberal Democrat activist. You know all the different ways to get in touch with the programme, but the phone number is the most important, 0345 6060 973. And do watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's Stephen in East Grinstead. Hi, Stephen.
Good evening to you. Good evening, panel. Will common sense prevail when Conservative MPs, party members and dodgy donors decide to dump the PM for their own personal and political interests?
Got to come to you, Esther.
Oh, you certainly have, because that is my mantle, isn't it? I've been dubbed that and happy to wear that mantle of common sense. Well, nobody will be getting rid of the Prime Minister. That wouldn't be common sense. And having spoken to everybody, pretty much all of our Conservative MPs, particularly as we had 10 votes last night, I managed to get around everybody. And apart from a couple of disgruntled people, actually, they all support Rishi Sunak. And I can quite honestly say if there were a vote of confidence in him, he'd absolutely win by a country mile. So that is not going to happen. But getting back to common sense is key. And actually it's something that the Prime Minister has very much brought in and something we absolutely need after lockdown. And things like not racing to net zero as other parties want to do that would push people into poverty. It is not working. The infrastructure isn't there. We need to do that at the right pace. And Rishi Sunak's the only leader that stood up for that, what the people want. So that's common sense. Also stopping HS2, something that had ballooned absolutely out of budget, and say, do you know what, we're going to spend that money in those local areas on the local infrastructure. And then finally, got to get the economy back on track, which is bringing inflation down. Once you've got inflation down, which we're seeing now wages going up, we're seeing confidence, consumer and business confidence going up, and then tax rates are high, I know that, but at least he started bringing them down, bringing that national insurance, bringing that. So that's common sense.
The budget was a wasted opportunity there, wasn't it? Because politically it's done no good to the Conservative Party at all. And, I mean, given that we are only a matter of months away from an election, that was kind of the last opportunity. Surely it would have been common sense to have made the most of that opportunity.
Well, I don't believe it was the last opportunity, if I'm being honest. And I would have liked to have seen, I'll be brutally honest, I am a low tax, low state Conservative. I would have liked to have seen more. However, what is common sense? You've got to work within the parameters you've got there. You've got to do it steady as she goes. And by the way, if anybody is fiscally competent, it is Rishi. That is his background. Everybody else doesn't have that background. And he said, and he followed the late, great Nigel Lawson, get inflation down and only then can you bring tax down. So yes, it was as steady as you go. I would have liked to have seen, more tax cuts, but I do believe they're on the way. And,
so
inflation figures about to...
you think there will be another budget before the election?
Some fiscal statement, I'm hoping, yes. And I think we'll see, as we get the economy back on track, those tax rates coming even further down. But that's the most thing, having a robust economy. And like I said, we've just had, 32 billion of foreign investment coming into the country because they believe in our country, whether that's Nissan, whether that's Google, so they believe in it. And look at the rest of Europe. We're now doing better, aren't we, than whether it's Japan, whether it's Germany. We've just overtaken France in manufacturing. So let's not talk our country down. It's been very difficult with lockdown, been very difficult with the Russian-Ukraine war. But, I think we're going to come out of this.
Alison.
I mean, whether Rishi Sunak goes before or after the election, he's on his way out. That seems perfectly evident. Conservative MPs, party members, didn't want him in the first place.
Well, the MPs did. They voted for him.
The party membership didn't want him, so they ended up with a Prime Minister that the party membership didn't want. Whether he goes before or after the election that he's almost inevitably going to lose now remains to be seen. Whether he has that sooner or later, that's very much what's going to happen here. He is going to lose this election. And Tory MPs can keep him or not keep him up until that point. So the result is pretty much inevitable at this stage. But he is the fifth Prime Minister since 2015. It was a party in chaos. They have trashed the economy and there is very little he can do to help that at all.
I hate to break it to you, but he's actually the sixth.
He's sixth? Who have I forgotten?
You've David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and maybe my maths are out.
I was having a panic there. I counted. There's been more chancellors.
He's so good he's felt like two. Is that what you're saying?
There's been more chancellors.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly.
More chancellors than prime ministers in any event. But it is a chaotic situation. There is nothing he can say here that's going to stave off that inevitable loss. And I do think that the budget was a missed opportunity. People weren't calling for more tax cuts. They're calling for more support for absolutely crumbling public services, which has happened as a result of this mismanagement over the past decade. It has happened because of austerity. And people are really seeing that now.
Is there a potential alternative Conservative leader that would cause the SNP to think, well, I hope they do stick with Rishi Sunak rather than it's probably a her rather than a him. I had an email from quite a left-wing Labour MP the other day, quite well-known one, who said, by the way, Penny Mordaunt's the one that we fear. Is that the same in the SNP? You can be honest.
And I don't fear any of them, really. They're selling the same stuff, and it's not something that Scotland has wanted to buy for quite some time.
OK. Kate?
Well, I don't think there will be a change of leader. I think the party, Conservative Party, which I'm not a member of, would be mad to go for another leader at this stage. It's far, far too late. And also, I think it would actually make the country lose even more respect for the whole kind of institution. They would become a
laughing stock if they did it, wouldn't they?
I just think there would be absolutely no credibility for them. So there's nothing to gain from changing the Prime Minister. The only thing that can change is if in the next few months Labour and Sir Keir Starmer, make a few mistakes, start actually giving detail of what they're actually going to do. And that could certainly help to bring the majority down. I mean, clearly at the moment it's pretty obvious there's going to be a change of government. The Tories will not want to lose they won't want to be destroyed. Although some people would say that that's the only way you'll actually then get what would be called a proper Conservative Party back if it's properly destroyed to start with. It won't be. But I think I genuinely don't think the majorities that people keep talking about will be like that, because there is not enthusiasm out there like there was. And I remember back when Tony Blair got elected, people were literally,
You're one of the Blair babes, weren't you?
Yeah, well, no, I was in before I came in, but yes. No, I was the only one didn't go in the photograph, myself and Claire Short.
Did you not?
No.
Why not?
Just didn't. We didn't like this idea that, they're sort of pushing all these sort of women's stuff. Anyway.
Good for you.
But, genuinely, I think when it gets nearer to the election, and of course there's all these unknowns, will George Galloway put up lots of Muslim candidates in Labour areas? Will Reform keep doing as well as they seem to be doing? I went down and helped Ben Habib in I've nearly forgotten where it was. Wellingborough. And I was genuinely interested in just how towards the end of that campaign...
Are you supporting Reform UK now?
I'm not a member of any political party, and having been an MP for one
that's a pretty good sign that you're a supporter.
No, I supported Ben Habib because I think he's brilliant. Right. I really like him. And towards the end of that campaign, the recognition for Reform was much greater, and if it hadn't been for postal votes, he would have got a lot more towards the end. So I think there's still an awful lot to play for, a lot of unknowns, and the Conservatives would be mad to now change the leader, no matter what you think of him.
OK, Mathew Hulbert.
Well, I mean, I want to say first off that I think if you have to appoint a particular minister with the title of for common sense, I don't quite know what that says about the rest of the administration.
It was dubbed by the media, so I wasn't. That's wrong.
But you accept it, right?
I totally do, because I think it's really important. It is about logic. It is about rationale, understanding. It is about sort of the common knowledge. So yes, I will take it on board. But I wasn't appointed
It's what most people want. They want some common sense in whoever's in power.
Common sense, Mathew? I mean, even the Liberal Democrats sometimes.
We very often speak common sense, and Ed Davey was talking a lot of it at the weekend. Go back and watch the speech, folks. I think we need a general election, not a Tory leadership election, and I think that is what the country are crying out for. I mean, we've got people who are having to choose between heating and eating. We've got a crisis in the NHS, which, as some people know, has affected my own family. We've got a crisis in social care. I mean, the country is absolutely desperate for a general election. So I just wish the Tories would stop, the navel-gazing, and that Rishi would go to the palace and call that election.
But it's, as you well know, constitutionally, he can decide when to have the election up to January 2025. It's most likely, I think, to be in the autumn, so that's not going to happen. But why do you think, and I assume you do think this, that why hasn't he connected with the electorate in the way that obviously most Conservatives hoped that he would when he became Prime Minister?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember back to his speech outside the steps of Downing Street after he'd just been appointed Prime Minister. And actually, as much as I, of course, would want to see an alternative to the Tories in government, I actually thought that it was a good speech, and that if he lived by what he said, if he governed in that way, with responsibility and with ethics and with integrity, well, OK, fair enough, we'll see how he gets on. But you can't say, that the government has done that. I mean, I listen to your show regularly, Iain, you'll be pleased to know, and you've reported to your listeners all the crises and all the controversies and all the rest of it, the Lee Andersons and all the rest, that we've seen over the past few weeks and months. And I think the Tories stop taking us for fools, call the election.
Esther, why do you think Rishi Sunak hasn't connected in the way that I suspect you hoped he would when he became Prime Minister? Is he seen as an administrator rather than a politician, that he doesn't get the politics of it?
I think, and I've been on a journey to get to know him as well, so I wouldn't have been part of his sort of circle of friends, but I think he took over at a really, really difficult time. We've all got to say whether that was immigration, whether that was coming out of lockdown, whether that was what was going on with Ukraine and Russia.
Liz Truss was the difficult time.
Yeah. And after Liz Truss, absolutely. And the guy is hugely studious, hugely diligent, and wanted to make sure he was on top of the detail. So I think he was doing a lot of the book work at the beginning to make sure, and everybody would say, irrespective of every department, who was the guy on top of the detail. It didn't matter if it was him in the Home Office knowing what was going on in Rwanda, it didn't matter if it was him in Treasury. So I think, and this is what I think he's got to do now, is come out and let us know the person. So
John Major.
I've got to know him a lot more. And I mean, crikey, he is the guy who could actually come out and say what a woman is. Keir Starmer can't. He knows what he is. He's
we're really going to go there, are we?
Our Lib Dem doesn't know what they're talking about either.
We're really going to start attacking one of the most vulnerable minorities in the country.
For goodness sake, I think what
Matthew,
she says is very sensible.
No,
she hasn't.
You know what that means.
No.
We're not going to get diverted into a row over trans issues, unless we have a question about it.
Biological sex, male and female. This is just life. That's what it is. And he is the only person who could stand up for that, and good for him. And I think he's got to come out now, and we've got to see him as a person, his family values, which we know, and, what he cares for his two young girls, and how he believes in extending opportunities to all, like he did himself. And I think we've got to see that. But I think we just got him at a time where he was just deep into the detail. And I think you're slowly seeing that come out now. And I want him to show the rest of the country, like I've got to know him. I want him to show his personality, and hopefully he'll get those opportunities.
Right, we'll move on to other issues in just a moment. It's 8:15.
This is LBC.
If you've just tuned in, we have Cabinet Minister Esther McVey, Alison Thewliss, SNP Home Affairs spokesperson, Baroness Kate Hoey, and Mathew Hulbert, Lib Dem activist and political commentator. Right, a text question now from Gordon in Hampstead. Is Labour really credible as the party of economic growth? Now, I suspect what lies behind his question is the fact that Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has delivered a speech in the City of London this evening saying the economy is in need of radical change, just like it was when Margaret Thatcher came to power, and saying there would need to be almost impossible trade-offs when it comes to taxing and spending if the economy doesn't begin growing again. But she confirmed that in the most explicit terms yet, that she will not change the Bank of England's 2% inflation target, and that her fiscal rules will closely resemble the government's current ones. Now, obviously tonight we don't have a Labour representative on the panel. I think we do. Have we got one tomorrow? I think we do. Kate Hoey, you used to be a Labour MP, so you're the closest that we've got on the panel. Does Rachel Reeves fill you with confidence in her economic strategy?
Well, I think Rachel is very intelligent and very competent and has come across pretty well on all her appearances. But, of course, the reality is, and we don't know the actual details, it sounds like there hasn't been a lot of detail in the speech. It's warm words, which you would expect at this stage. It sounds to me like there isn't really a huge difference going to be when it comes to the crunch in the policies of Labour and the policies of the Conservatives.
But the electorate are going to be very disappointed if that's the case, aren't they?
I think the electorate are hugely disillusioned with politics as it is today, and we will see that in probably the turnout. I'm genuinely sure that there will be very, very, very big numbers of people, large numbers of people who just don't bother voting because they say, what's the point? They're all the same. And it'll be up to the other parties, like the Lib Dems, although they're not doing particularly well either at the moment, to show that they want to be different. And so I until I see the detail of what she said, but it sounds every time she's been on, although she looks and competent, comes across as knowing what she's talking about, she doesn't actually go into any detail. And the fact that we're a long way, a few months probably from the general election, she's not going to go into any detail, and we're probably not going to get an awful lot more detail before the general election.
Mathew, as Kate says, Lib Dem's not doing particularly well in the polls, being overtaken by Reform UK in some of the polls. But when you hear what I just read out about Rachel Reeves' speech, does that fill you with confidence, or does it fill you with a slight sense of despair, given that most of the things she seems to be saying could be said by Conservative politicians?
Well, apart from the Lib Dem point, I'm going to say something that I didn't expect to find myself saying today, which is I agree with Kate Hoey. There you go. It's on the public record. I think people are disillusioned at the moment, and I've written down here in kind of capital letters, where is the hope? And I think people want hope, and of course I appreciate that an incoming administration, as it looks like Labour will be, can't go promising the earth as Jeremy Corbyn once did. Of course they can't. But I think people want to know that there's going to be some effort to tackle income inequality. I think people want to know that there's going to be some investment in public services which have been left to rot. I mean, I was hearing the other day in a newspaper report about literally a crumbling hospital, a hospital that the roof fell down on patients. How the government can claim any credibility on the NHS, I really don't know. And so I think people want hope. And I don't think they're getting it from Labour at the moment. I mean, I think Labour are that cautious, they're constipated. I mean, I think, Labour really need to provide people with some hope, whilst, of course, being truthful about the fact that there's not going to be that much money to spend.
How do your policies differ from Labour's? I mean, in terms of economic strategy?
Well, I'm not a spokesperson for my party, so I can perhaps be a bit more honest than a bit more upfront about our situation. A bit more upfront about our situation than perhaps our spokespeople can. I think we should be doing better. And apparently, I wasn't at conference as it happens this past weekend, but apparently spirits were high, and I do think that with a good wind, we should go back to being the third party in the Commons again. I have to say to Alison Thewliss, which will be important because we'll have those two questions a week at Prime Minister's Questions, but I think we should be doing better in the polls.
But why aren't you? Is it because of lacklustre leadership?
I think it's because, with all three actually of the main parties and their leaders at the moment, that it's all very managerial. And you mentioned Tony Blair. I was a Labour supporter back in the days of Tony Blair, left over Iraq, I have to say. But Blair was inspiring. Whatever you think of him now, he inspired and he gave a vision of hope and a vision for the country. I don't think any of the major party leaders do that today.
The trouble is, I suppose, if you do what Sarah Palin used to call the hopey changey thing, you've then got to deliver on it, which, I mean, even Barack Obama didn't really in some ways. Alison Thewliss, going back to Rachel Reeves, I mean, how different is her economic strategy to the one that the SNP government is following in Scotland?
Well, what we want to see, particularly from the UK government, because that's still where, unfortunately for the time being, most of these economic levers lie, much more investment in the economy. We've seen the Scottish government's capital budget being cut in real terms, and the House of Commons Library has confirmed those figures.
That's because presumably the Scottish government has chosen to do that.
We don't have full control over the block grant, so these things are being cut back in Scotland. What we would like to be doing is investing a good deal more. We would like to be investing more in public infrastructure, public housing, all of those kinds of things.
But those are all under the control of the SNP government.
But the block grant still comes...
they're devolved issues.
Yes, but the budget for them is not entirely devolved. The Scottish Government can't borrow for revenue funding. We have to present a balanced budget every year. So we're in a slightly different position to the UK Government on that, with all of the borrowing powers and the various things that can be done there. Cutting back on infrastructure investment, for example, or on green investment, is just utterly self-defeating. Because the Labour Party had their plans, had their policies.
We have a question coming up on that, so let's not go too far down that road.
Not go too far with that. But the lack of ambition there from the Labour Party is incredibly disheartening. And, you know, I remember also Blair coming to power in 97. I was a teenager at the time. That was exciting. There's nothing exciting about the Labour Party now. Nothing at all in their policy platforms. They're doing exactly the same as what the Conservative Party are doing just now. They're sticking to those rules. They're not making any changes. They're not rocking the boat. And what is dragging you up off your sofa to go out and vote for this? Nothing.
Well, according to the opinion polls in Scotland, they're becoming more popular than the SNP.
Well, various opinion polls say different things on this, and I've been out chapping doors doing lots of speaking to constituents, as I always do. And people are making up their minds as to how they vote in this election. And what is going to be the difference to have another Labour MP from Scotland who will be part of a morass of Labour MPs here? What you need is an SNP MP who will stand up for Scotland.
But you know as well as I do that you're not... How many MPs have you got now? Is it 50?
43.
43. You're not going to get anywhere near that at the next election, are you? You must be prepared that that's going to reduce probably to under 30.
Well, we'll see what happens. Every seat is in play, everything we can fight for.
Okay. Esther McVey.
Well, I was reading the trails today of this speech, and I did smile that they were using comparisons with Margaret Thatcher. They were talking about how they were going to change things. We both knew Margaret Thatcher. But I just thought, oh my goodness, this is all spin and no content. You're nothing like Margaret Thatcher. Your party don't like Margaret Thatcher. You're not going to make any great changes like Margaret Thatcher. I just thought that was a nonsense. So I thought this is spin. They're just trying to reach out to a Conservative vote and say, you're safe with us, it's all going to be fine. But then when you listen to the words, it is empty words there going nowhere. But what we do know, they had a £28 billion green growth deal. We don't know, or green growth plan, I should say. And we don't know, are they going to do that or not? What is that all about?
Well, they said they're not now.
No, they're going to keep it. They're just not going to spend as much. So Lord knows what that means. So that was sort of their big plan. So it's interesting. People like the CBI and the IOD say, you know what, we need a little bit more detail now. What does it mean? What are you going to do? And then I think the CBI have said, but we don't want anything like, because obviously they've come forward with new rights for workers. How will this work for businesses? So they said, we don't want anything like a European view on sort of workers' rights. And people are really starting to dig into that detail. And remember, this is a party that said we're going to renationalise, and now it's not. Keir Starmer's changed his mind on that. He said he was going to get rid of student fees, and he's not anymore. What are they going to do with Brexit? Lord only only knows. Are they going to go back in there? Are they going to get rid of these free trade deals now that the Conservative Party are putting together? So I think
Why would they do that?
Why would they go back into Europe?
Because why would they do away with the trade deals?
Well, if they're trying to align themselves back in Europe, which we know they do, it's Keir Starmer's always wanted
well, he
to do.
He would get rid he wouldn't go back into the single market.
But he specifically said he was going to renationalise. He specifically said he was going to get rid of student fees. So I wouldn't go by anything that he specifically said. So I think really what people are asking for is clarity on what Labour are going to do. And it's a million miles from what the Conservative Party are going to do. Because I'll tell you one thing, there's only one party throughout history that's got us ever out of financial difficulties, and that is the Conservative Party. Labour Party leave you with debt and leave you with high unemployment. And that's why I believe, obviously, that you need the Conservative Party.
I mean, I'd like to ask our Minister for Common Sense what she thinks about the fact that apparently there have been reports that the NHS is literally crumbling, that hospitals are literally crumbling onto patients. I mean, it was one example. I appreciate that. But I can tell you just very quickly what happened to my mum July 2022. She fell at home in the early hours. I got her. She said she'd hurt her ribs, so we didn't move her. We called for an ambulance at 5 a.m. and 11 hours later, Esther, a paramedic arrived, further called for an ambulance. Mum was taken to hospital and she died 2 days later after an infection turned to sepsis. So I know as well as anyone how the NHS, when the system isn't working, when the system is crumbling, if you want to put it that way, has a real effect on real people and real families, including my own. Don't just answer with, we're putting this investment in, because that just doesn't wash with me after my experience.
And listen, you know what went on, and that's tragic, and I will not say anything other than that. I listened to the date there, July 2022, and I will say I was one of very few people who voted against lockdowns because what I thought would happen. And that was queues going up, people not going into hospitals. And that's why I said, let's not do it. I was one of about 5 in some of the votes. So Labour voted for it, Lib Dems voted for Conservatives. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now is because of what happened in lockdown. So I will tell you a significant amount of money has gone into the NHS. Yes, I will. But I think unpicking the damage of 2 years of lockdown is going to take a very, very long time. And what happened to your mum there is tragic.
But can I say to you that, don't take any heart in the fact that that was a couple of years ago, because, I did a bit on regional telly the other day.
I wasn't, I was just looking at the
okay, but I did a bit on regional telly the other day talking about the fact that East Midlands Ambulance Service, my region, I'm from Leicestershire, recently reported 18,000 plus lost hours in February alone due to patient handovers, because ambulances can't do the handover because there's people in hospital that are well enough to go home but haven't got the care at home, because social care is in bits as well. So,
I know,
we are slightly going off the topic here, and I have to go to the news, so I'm going to call it quits on that discussion. It's 8:31 on LBC. Serena Farrow has the news headlines.
The Shadow Health Secretary's called for police to reinvestigate after an NHS mental health worker secretly recorded a patient naked. West Streeting has told LBC it's shocking to think no crime had been committed at the Harbour in Blackpool. The Justice Secretary's welcomed the sentencing of the first person ever convicted of cyber flashing in England and Wales. 39-year-old Nicholas Hawkes from Basildon in Essex sent unsolicited photos to a woman and a 15-year-old girl. And the UN Secretary-General says Earth is issuing a distress call. A report's found evidence of yet more record-breaking temperatures last year. LBC weather, rain in the southwest spreading northeastwards overnight. Still staying dry though in Scotland with a low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC.
Esther McVey is here for the Conservatives, Alison Thewliss for the SNP, Mathew Hulbert sort of for the Liberal Democrats, but in a sort of independent commentatory kind of way too, he thinks. And Baroness Kate Hoey, we have yet to establish exactly where she is politically at the moment. Non-aligned, which means you can say anything.
Exactly.
Right, let's go to Simon in Edgware. Simon, hello.
Good evening, Ian. My question for the panel is this. Do you think that the government and universities throughout the UK are doing enough to combat the appalling rise in anti-Semitism on campuses?
Well, we discussed this earlier, and the Higher Education Minister, Rob Halfon, has warned of a more than 200% rise in anti-Semitic incidents at universities since October the 7th. Alison, I mean, this is an issue across the UK, isn't it? That it's heart-rending to hear the stories of Jewish students and the way that they're being shunned, the way they're being treated by people who they formerly regarded as friends. What can be done about it?
Well, I think the first thing that can be done about it is that people should cease abusing their fellow students in the first place and give a lot more consideration to what everyone's going through. And my heart absolutely goes out to those people that had phoned in and given their stories. There should be no place in our society for anti-Semitism. What I also heard, and I was in for the statement last week in Parliament around the new measures that Gove wants to bring in, and what I'd heard in the run-up to that is from some Muslim constituents also about what they've faced, because there's also been a significant rise in Islamophobia as well, and they feel also, very vulnerable, quite terrified, feeling unable to speak out lest they be tarred with any kind of support for organisations or anything else. It's very difficult for everybody, and I think really what needs to happen here is people need to take a breath and think about the impact of their words on other people.
Mathew?
Well, I think it's shocking and depressing to hear the statistic that you've just given us, Ian. I mean, I can just about remember my university days about 20-odd years ago, and I'm so old. I'm so middle-aged now. But, it should be a place where you can go and, as well as learning, where you should be able to have a good time with your friends, where you should be able to be your full self on a university campus. And that must be so difficult for Jewish students and indeed for Muslim students, as Alison quite rightly says. And I just think for university campuses to not be a safe place to be for all students is atrocious. And I'd just say that we all have a responsibility to call out prejudice of any kind if it's safe to do so. But of course, those that need to do so most are the authorities of these institutions. They need to be doing more to keep their students safe.
Esther?
Well, I agree with everybody else. It's shameful, it's unacceptable, and we live in a tolerant society, a free society, and we want it to keep that way. But I will be asking, what are the universities doing? I think they owe their students a duty of care. They're paying to be there. They're on site. They're paying maybe for the student accommodation. What are they doing? They've seen the rise in, as you say, this anti-Semitism. Is the CCTV? Have they got security guards? Are they calling people out if this happens? Are they listening to the evidence people have got?
They say they've been rather hamstrung by your new legislation about free speech in universities, and they say they have to be very careful about about implementing new measures because it could go against that free speech legislation.
One's free speech, and the other one are attacks in one form or another. They are not the same, and please don't use free speech as if it's a negative thing. No, but please, for them, do not use free speech, which is a positive thing, because really what you're wanting is speech, people talking about things, not having a blinkered view and then attacking people. So no, don't hide behind their universities. Do some action and call these people to account.
Kate?
Yes, well, I think universities should be doing more. I mean, we had that example, which could be seen as anti-Semitic, of that painting of Bill for being completely trashed by someone, and apparently the university doesn't want to actually do anything about that because they think that would only make things worse. So that nothing has happened to that young person, and nothing seems to happen to any of the people within university who are caught doing ridiculous things. And the difference between being anti-Semitic and Islamophobia, which is just as bad, is the reality, of course, is that, young Jewish people are seeing every week on the streets, particularly in London, huge demonstrations of people going out with placards that they see as being anti-Jewish, even though many of the people who are carrying those placards don't think that they're being anti-Jewish. And that's very different, because the Jewish community is not a huge community in this country. And it really is being persecuted in different ways. And I do think, I don't know whether the legislation that's coming will make any difference, but certainly the universities, the kind of person who does that should be kicked out.
Well, if some of it's looking at funding going to organisations, if they look at extremism, well, maybe funding should be withdrawn from organisations that isn't protecting their students.
Yes.
Can we get Kristen Stubbington up on the line? I want to do him next, please. And is he here? No, he is here. Chris, you have an interesting question to ask. This will be a good one to go into the next break with.
Hello. It's in Witheridge in Devon. Bells have rung out for centuries. But now, after one complaint, they've been silenced at night. Should this person who made the complaint get a life or move or buy earplugs?
Right, I'm going to repeat that because it was a really bad line. Chris's question is this. In the Devon village of Witheridge, church bells have rung out for centuries. After just one complaint, the bells are now silent. Shouldn't that person just move, get a life, or buy some earplugs? I've got another suggestion, that the vicar should grow some... You know what?
Exactly.
Esther. I've stolen your thunder.
I agree with
That's
you.
true.
Literally, you have one complaint. But actually, they've been ringing for centuries, giving people great pleasure. People have lived there listening to it. To have one complaint, that is pitiful that you've caved into one complaint. And you're quite right. If you've moved into an area that's had bells ringing forever, you knew where you were buying, you knew what you were doing, you've bought into the area. So get those bells back ringing.
It's a bit similar to
common
people...
sense from Esther McVey there. Even Mathew, I think, will agree with that.
Nodding. The table was nodding.
It's a bit like people who move from the town into the country and get really upset when the cock crows. Yeah, I mean, it's outrageous. And then, the idea that... So I just think that, this is the way, I don't know what's happened to the country in the last number of years. These are the kind of silly things that happen, and somehow the authorities always give in. And you're right. The priests.
No, you're a churchgoer, aren't you, Matthew? So you can give us a bit of a different perspective.
I go to an inclusive Church of England church, and I was just thinking that every Sunday as I walk my way in Hinckley, down to St Mary's Church in Hinckley. There you go. I've given them a plug. I love hearing the church bells. It makes me feel all Sunday-ish and happy and lovely.
Sunday-ish.
Sunday-ish, brilliant. And so it would be terrible to have those silent. So on this occasion, I do think that this person needs to pop in some earplugs or move.
I don't know if you knew this, but I am actually a bell ringer.
Are you?
Or was. A campanologist.
Bell ringer.
A bell ringer.
Yeah.
A bell ringer.
Get down to Devon and get on those bells.
Yes.
Playing Bob Major, I can still remember how to do that.
Oh, really?
I used to ring the number 6 bell out of 8. Alison, that shocked you, hasn't it?
No, not at all. I do feel kind of sad that the church bells have stopped ringing, but on the other side of that, I moved offices in Parliament because I was across from Westminster Abbey and the bells would ring for an hour at a time and I couldn't get any work done. So I do have some sympathy for people.
But what did you do? You moved.
I moved offices. I moved offices. I'm also a very light sleeper as well, so a bell going off every 15 minutes would cause me some havoc.
You do get used to it, because when I moved into my house in Norfolk, it's literally 100 yards from the church, and on a Sunday morning, I mean, it is quite loud, but I do manage to sleep through it. So, but anyway, I think the message from our panel is loud and clear. Get the bells back, otherwise the vicar should resign. That's the headline for the Daily Express. It's 8:45.
LBC.
Esther McVey, Alison Thewliss, Baroness Kate Hoey and Mathew Hulbert with us answering your questions. Here's a text question from Andrew in Clitheroe. Climate scientists say the number of extreme weather events happening is off the charts and the planet is experiencing its hottest temperatures ever. What will it take for governments around the world to take these warnings seriously? Now, the World Meteorological Organization says last year was the warmest on record by a clear margin, and it needs to sound the red alert to the world about the scale of climate change which has already taken place. Mathew?
Well, I agree. Do you want more than that?
If you'd like to offer more than that.
So I think your texter is absolutely right. I think it is the overwhelming challenge of our age, but because it's seen as a long-term challenge, I mean, I'd argue that it's not actually, that climate change is with us today and it's only going to get worse and
but it's always been with us,
more and more. Oh, I really hate that
well,
argument.
I mean, you go back to the 13th, 14th centuries and they were growing grapes in York. They're not doing that at the moment, so but records weren't kept then. So we know that there was a very hot period then, which it can't all have been down to man at that point. I'm not being a climate change denier, as people like to call it, but we do actually have to question this sometimes.
Well, it's always right to question things, but there's no doubt that human beings are having an adverse effects on the climate, and that communities in parts of Africa and elsewhere are really suffering, and eventually that will reach us, and that's why we've got to act now. And I'd implore the government to do governments to do more than they're doing at the moment, because that far off distant time will be with us sooner than we think.
But isn't it for those who cause the most pollution to do more? And we know which countries they are, and they're generally the ones that haven't really stepped up to the plate.
Indeed, and America and China and other countries should be doing more, but ultimately it's a global challenge and it needs a global response. And so all the governments in the UK should be doing much more than they're doing.
Kate?
Well, I think we're already doing quite a lot, and the problem is that it's actually making a lot of people poorer and feeling that our country is taking very, very brave decisions about cutting back on things, and it's costing the average person more money. When they see, as you've just mentioned, they see what's happening in India and China, other countries, and think. So, the question was about the world, the global situation. I'm not sure that just because we do things that are actually going to make it even more expensive for people to live, that's going to make China change. So I do think that there also has to be questioning sometime of this kind of almost zealotry attitude to it that allows not the scientists who, and there are scientists who have slightly different views, but they very, very rarely get a listen in and on our mainstream media. So I'm not a climate change denier, but I'm very sceptical about the way in which it's now being used as the speed of everything. That this is all going to happen almost in the next few years. I still. I live in Northern Ireland now, and I never see any warm weather, hardly ever. So I'm not taken in with this idea that sort of global warming. I would like a little bit in Northern Ireland, I have to say. I'm just a little bit more careful than I think some people are on this.
Alison.
I mean, this is coming to our doorsteps. That's what should be making politicians pay attention in this country. And doing nothing is incredibly expensive as well, because if you look at the climate events, if you look at flooding, if you look at drought and crop failures, these are coming. They are coming more quickly, more frequently than they were before, and doing nothing about that is incredibly expensive. And that's why this is the worst possible time to be cutting back on green investment in the kind of technologies and the type of industries that will change that. We should be investing in the just transition rather than issuing more oil and gas licences, for example, because we can't get to where we need to be by issuing more oil and gas licences. We should be investing more in renewables. We should be developing those technologies ourselves so that we have the supply chain in this country as well, so that other people in other places aren't making these things and then shipping them over. We should be having the industries here that can be producing these new clean green technologies of the future. We should be insulating homes right across the place so that we're using less energy in our own homes rather than having the leakiest houses, I think, in Europe. But at the same time, that's incredibly expensive for people too, because they're paying an awful lot for their energy bills. In leaky houses, they're absolutely freezing, and folk are dying in the cold in the winter. That doesn't happen in the Nordic countries.
Esther.
Well, I think I'm going to bring in some common sense and some facts in here. It feels only
we'll
right
be the
that
judge
I should.
of that.
Okay, no, that's fine. Because, I think we also have to look at what the UK has done so far. We're pretty much leading the world in this. So we've cut carbon emissions by nearly 50% since the 1990s. So more than the EU average, more than Canada, more than America. So we are doing all these things about new technologies, looking at wind farms, looking at solar panels, looking at nuclear. I would like to look at tidal as we are an island. It's because you want to be self-sufficient. So you've got to look at energy security, so that you're not beholden to other people. You've got to look at affordability and reliability. So let's take credit for what the UK has done, which is a lot. But at the same time, you cannot go at a speed that technology isn't there. You can't have this zealotry about how fast you want to go there, following up for what Kate said. You can't push people into poverty. Equally, you can't wish that you had the technology that isn't there, or the infrastructure yet that isn't there. So look, the UK has done more than others, and as Kate also pointed out, look at how many new sort of coal China's bringing back on board. Look at how much more India's doing. Are we going to impoverish ourselves to what other people are doing, or are we going to be hypocritical and say we're not going to build it here, we're not going to make it here, but we're going to import all those goods from elsewhere? So let's be honest. Let's actually celebrate what the UK has done, and we all want to look after the environment, but do it in a way that you can afford it and the technology is there to support it.
John says, can somebody explain to Kate that climate change means more extreme weather events, not a more clement, mild summer in Ulster?
No,
right.
but we're talking about global warming.
Let's go on to the hot issue of the week. Sally in Malvern wants to know this. It's now been revealed that another photo taken by Princess Kate of the late Queen with some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren was digitally enhanced, possibly as many as 19 times. I mean, will this never end? What will finally make this storm about Kate and her photos finally go away? 30 seconds each. Esther.
Just take a photo and just put it out there. Don't change it. It's that simple. I know we all want to look better, but just do. She's a beautiful woman. She really does not need any enhancements. Just put a photo out there.
Have you never had a photo of yourself digitally enhanced?
As best as I can. I usually try and do the light differential. I can't think what else is. There's light, brightness, and that's about as good as I get, right? But if it's a naff photo, I just destroy it, right? Yeah, exactly. I don't put it out there and try and change it significantly. And there's loads of them out there which I haven't had any control over.
Okay, Alison.
I think this whole thing is just absolutely wild, absolutely baffling, and all the conspiracy theories rolling around it. And I think what makes it slightly worse is they haven't appeared to make any kind of public statement. She hasn't appeared to come on camera and say, here's what's happening. So it's just feeding into this madness of conspiracy theories. People just go down rabbit holes with this stuff.
Mathew?
It's wild.
Well, part of me is bored to tears with this whole story, but actually I do think that there's an element of trust with the royal family. We need to be able to trust what they put out, and that's why this has been a story. But as you know, Iain, and I speak solely for myself with this, and not on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, but...
Oh, you're not going there, are you?
It's a story about the royal family. I've got to not...
Go on, then.
So I am a Republican. I think we should have an elected head of state, and so I say, save the royal family, set them free, let's have an elected president.
Kate,
no.
I'm so bad.
That's common sense.
No. Keep the royal family.
I'm so bad at technology that I didn't quite understand all the little squares round what had been. It didn't look to me any different. But I expect a lot of this will stop as soon as the princess is back, hopefully as soon as possible. And I'm a great royalist. I think the idea of someone like... I don't know, some ex-Liberal Democrat leader standing for president.
Nick
Clegg,
yes.
exactly.
Now there's an idea that we can all unite.
They managed perfectly well in the Republic of Ireland to have presidents that do the job without all the hangers-on and all the family.
That's not going to influence me.
Ireland does a lot of things right.
That's not going to influence
Can
me.
anybody name the president of Ireland?
Michael D. Higgins.
Correct.
Thank you.
OK, let's move on to our fun question, which was going to be about James Bond, but we've had a better one in.
Oh, good.
I've got an answer to the James Bond.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm going to put this one to you. Robbie has texted, today the government announced increased regulation of football. If you could do a VAR check and reverse any one political decision since 2019, what would it be? Matthew?
Only since 2019.
Well,
Yes,
we can have a bit of elastic.
Because I mean, of course, it would be the EU referendum, wouldn't it? I'm very pro-European.
Kate?
I would not have the protocol, which is absolutely splitting off Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. Very simple.
OK, it's not a very fun answer so far, it has to be said. Alison?
I mean, if we're picking things that we wish for at the independence referendum for Scotland, but on a policy level, scrap the two-child limit in the rape clause.
Esther?
To have come out of lockdown in June 2020, you had the first bit, March to June, and not all those lockdowns.
And OK, well, we didn't get any fun answers
No.
there. And my producers are going to kill me because I insisted that we did that rather than the previous one. So let's have your alternate James Bond, because it was going to be, Aaron, what's his name? Aaron...
Taylor Johnson.
Well, I mean, part of me wants to nominate your producer, Corey. I think he'd be brilliant.
Oh, my God.
But in terms of...
Yeah, he just wants another invite.
In terms of,
He's taking a bow now behind the window.
But he's great, Corey. In terms of political figures, a fellow Liberal, Justin Trudeau, very good-looking, action man.
No.
He would be. I love Justin.
Wet weekend.
No.
Love him.
Kate?
Oh, I mean, I presume you don't want to do it, Ian.
I think I'm older than Daniel Craig, so I think that rules me out.
So we're ageist now, are we?
Yeah, I'm being ageist against myself.
I really, political figure.
Oh,
I don't know.
it's got to be
I mean,
political.
Tony Blair
No, it doesn't
wants to
have to be
keep
political.
coming back, doesn't he? So maybe Tony Blair could have a...
No, I can't see him as James Bond. Alison?
I really enjoyed Ethan Peck in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I think he would be quite good as a Bond.
Never heard of him. Esther?
I've always had a soft spot for Jason Statham.
Oh, yeah, Jason Statham, definitely. A note of agreement with the Minister of Common Sense.
I knew I'd get you at the end.
I am never going to intervene on choosing questions again. Chris and Corey will be very delighted to hear that news. On tomorrow's panel, Labour Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh will be here, Conservative backbencher Brendan Clark-Smith, The Independent's political journalist Zoe Grunewald, and the Mail on Sunday columnist Dan Hodges. That should be a spicy one as well. Thanks to my panel tonight, to Esther McVey, Alison Thewliss, Kate Hoey and Mathew Hulbert. Now, coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about the challenges of being a single parent in Britain in 2024. The French government have come up with an interesting idea. They're trialling a 4-day working week for divorced parents so they can have a day off to care for their children. Not quite sure how that would work necessarily, but I want to broaden this out and ask what it's like being a single parent in Britain in 2024. Do you get the support that you need? Do you think that there's still a bit of a stigma about being a single parent? Want to hear your stories next. 0345 6060 973. That's the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.